our keynote speaker. And I also can do that dance. Not today. She's a professor of history and political science. It's Dr. Ingrid Deneen Wimberly. As a disabled veteran of the first Gulf War, Dr. Deneen Wimberly decided to leave her career at the U.S. Navy as air traffic controller to further her education and to ultimately become a historian and an educator. After 20 years of teaching experience, Dr. Deneen Wimberly considers her current position and experiences at the University of Laverne at Point Mugu campus among the most rewarding work of her career. She is the author of several articles, reviews, and book chapters. Her manuscript, By the Least Bit of Blood, The Allure of Blackness Among Mixed-Race Americans from 1862 to 1919, will be released this year in 2014. And I know I'm gonna get hurt for this, but I'm gonna go on in. Our theme is, the 50 years after Washington, the struggle continues. And I'm only gonna say a little bit about this, and I'll take my chance. Dr. Deneen Wimberly, when I remember when she got her BA, we had a little celebration, right? And I was like, wow, that was great. When she got her master's degree, she didn't even go. Got in the car and came home. Just drove home. Like, what's going on? She wasn't finished. We're not finished. Today, we get to call her Dr. Ingrid Deneen Wimberly. So now I give you Dr. Deneen Wimberly, and I also have to say she's the mother of my children and my beloved wife. This is Dr. Deneen Wimberly.
Thank you so much for that. Good morning, community.
Good morning.
You look absolutely beautiful today, I have to tell you. Thank you, first of all, for participating in the 28th Ventura County Annual Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration. I want to congratulate and applaud the Alpha Kappa Alpha speakers, the debutantes, the academic honorees, the entire youth choir who were beautiful, the dancers, and to all the volunteers, both civilian and military. And I'm proud to say that a lot of those military volunteers are my students, so I'm happy to see you here today. I want to extend a thank you. I am particularly grateful to Mrs. Loretta Montgomery for her unyielding efforts to provide networks of support and her role as a community leader. I thank Dr. Ira Jeffries and the entire MLK Junior Planning Committee for their service and continued efforts to extend community and for asking me to present this keynote today. Thank you to my husband for providing such a warm introduction, and to my children, Grace Deneen Wimberly, Zach, and Landon Wimberly. And I want to welcome all the distinguished guests today. It is fitting, I believe, to be a bit nervous to deliver an address such as this. A bit of trepidation, just a little bit of fear, reveals the value one assigns to such a task. You see, talking with my community is a very big deal. Talking with my community about a giant such as Martin Luther King is for me a special and an important honor. As I prepared to speak with you this morning, I recalled the courage my daughter, Grace Deneen, exhibited as she prepared a speech about the infamous, famous civil rights leader, John Lewis. I remember she had a terrible cold, but she didn't want to miss the chance to talk about the impact of student activism. But she had to get her head right, you see. So in order to get her head right, she listened to Sam Cooke's A Change Gonna Come. And she listened to Curtis Mayfield's Keep On Pushing. And I am not embarrassed to tell you that those songs were played in my house this morning. Now this year's theme, 50 years after the march, the struggle continues, could not be more fitting. The theme connects the crucial, transformational, even dangerous historical context which framed Reverend Dr. King's leadership to our current circumstances. Now, America at mid-century and America today are in some ways similar. Despite the historic election of America's first African-American president in 2008 and 2012, racial tensions continue to rise. Yes, Jim Crow segregation and lynching are not part of our everyday landscape, but the state of affairs in many communities is quite dire. Statistically, there are more people in the United States who live in poverty than did during the Great Depression, except we just can't see them because they're invisible. 36 states have crafted voter ID legislation with the potential or aim to restrict the vote. The jobless rate among communities of color are at least triple that of other communities. Rates of incarceration for non-violent offenses are at epidemic levels. Gun violence continues to place our children at risk. In social, political, environmental, spiritual, and economic matters, we face definite and immediate challenges. However, in order to speak to today's struggle, we need to consider just for a bit the historical struggles Reverend Dr. King Jr. and the members of the civil rights larger movement during the 1950s and 60s faced. Now, I've taught history for a long time, and I see, as I said, some of my students here today, and I promise I will not hold class today, okay? But let us at least recognize that there exists a large gulf between what I call the standard narrative of the civil rights movement, led by Reverend Dr. King Jr., and the hidden activism which made the modern movement possible and effective. But see, most of us are comfortable, we're familiar with that standard narrative. It's the one we learned about in school, or it's the one that we watched as we watched those television programs air during Black History Month, right? But the story goes something like this. Mrs. Rosa Parks' brave decision to not succumb to the humiliating, unconstitutional law of segregation by refusing to give up her seat kicked off a bus boycott, which then mobilized the African American community, led by Dr. King, into a larger movement for political, social, and economic justice. The mobilization of millions of African Americans who participated in marches, boycotts, sit-ins, freedom rides, and litigation would pressure presidents and legislators to eventually pass and decide on key civil rights laws like Brown v. Board of Education in 54, or the Civil and Voting Rights Acts of 64 and 65. So we stand here today, 50 years after the iconic March on Washington in 1963, when Reverend Dr. King crystallized a moral imperative, calling not only on leaders, but on ordinary people to recognize the injustice of all sorts, which had for too long weighed down an entire people. As we recognize today that indeed the struggle continues, let us not gain inspiration from just the simple narrative. Let us be inspired by the heretofore hidden forms of activism or broader policy agendas Dr. King so passionately articulated. For example, if we just simply remember that the March on Washington in '63 was actually called the March on Washington for Jobs and for Freedom. If we do this, then the theme of economic injustice plays center stage and connects our contemporary challenges to theirs. In fact, you might even see yourself in the faces of those black and white photos of people holding signs saying or reading, "Jobs and freedom for every American now," and "March for jobs now." If you scratch just beneath the surface, you may come to see that we do nothing alone. For example, Mrs. Rosa Parks was not some aberration, nor was she a single shooting star which only comes once in a lifetime. No, rather she was an active member of her local NAACP chapter, a chapter which provided her institutional support. That is, her membership, her relationship with her local NAACP chapter enabled her to take such a brave stand, as she knew that those NAACP lawyers were going to make her bad. You see, we do big things together. We don't do them alone. Reverend Dr. King Jr. was quite aware of this, and he knew that without the determination of ordinary Americans who were willing to do extraordinary things, that there would be no modern civil rights movement, or what we call the long civil rights movement. That is, without the countless, nameless women who were willing to pass out 35,000 handbills, which were printed at an HBCU, I should tell you, Alabama State College. Without their willingness to give those bills to their families at home and at church, there'd be no boycott for Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King to lead. Without the willingness of those nameless, countless domestic workers who refused to ride to work and instead walked miles to care for other people's children, only to return by foot in time to care for their own, there would be no modern movement. I should say now that not all of those women were nameless. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Marion Wright Eldon, Vivian Jones, Septima Clark, Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, and Myrlie Everett, and a whole slew of others, served as full civil rights leaders in their own right. In terms of clergymen, Reverend Dr. King Jr. and his contemporaries like Reverends Aberman, Shuttlesworth, Lovely, men who brought the churches to the table by the formation of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They understood from the outset that the modern civil rights movement needed to be held up by grace. And they knew that it needed to be multidimensional. And they knew that it needed to be rooted in community. As did SNCC activists like John Lewis, who brought students to the civil rights movement. Or A. Philip Randolph, who brought labor to the table. Or Medgar and Myrlie Evers, who brought World War II vets and grieving mothers to the table. Or Marion Wright Eldon and Thurgood Marshall, who brought lawyers to the table. Or Whitney Young, who brought business via the Urban League to the table. Or Baynard Rustin, who we've come to realize provided the representation of the LGBT community to the table of civil rights. King and the leaders in his circle knew that this moment was really of the people. As it turns, the bulk of the heavy lifting was going to be on the shoulders of not just the people, but of the young people. In May 1963, just 3 months before the iconic March on Washington, and just 4 months before 4 little girls were murdered in a Birmingham church, a man by the name of Reverend James Bevel organized the Children's Crusade. Thousands of children from elementary to high school marched for civil rights and equal education for themselves, while they marched for voting rights for their parents. At the time, some criticized Reverend Bevel for including children. But the fact is that those children's parents, if they had jobs, needed to keep their jobs. And those children's teachers needed to keep their jobs. Thus, children took up the banner. This morning, children in the audience, from grade school to high school, know we recognize you today, that you have something to say and you have something to give. And Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King recognized this as well. He agreed. He said, quote, "I think it's a mighty fine thing for children, because when you march, you're really standing up. And a man can't ride your back unless it's bent." That's what he said. Children made all the difference. As the press got wind, news outlets began to publicize the deaths of boys like Emmett Till in '55, or those Birmingham girls in '63. The pictures of children being arrested, hosed with water, and chased with barking dogs went national, and it started to make an impact. You see, up until then, many Americans were disinterested, or largely disinterested, in the racial exclusion or racial violence African Americans faced on a daily basis. As Olga Renee mentioned earlier, King once said, quote, "History will have to record not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people." And you see, children and young people in general, as Congressman Lewis likes to say, made some noise and got in the way and broke that appalling silence. For those who sit in the audience today who are in their 20s, please know that we recognize that you have something to say today and that you have something to give today. After all, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King was only 25 years old when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. as a young pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He was just 35 years old when he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Moreover, those young people, many of them college students, were multicultural and multiracial, just like this audience. Black, white, brown, red, and yellow participated and made a difference in the movement that King led. As one poster read at that infamous 63 march, "We march together, Catholics, Jews, Protestants, for dignity and brotherhood for all men now." By the end, when King was constructing the Poor People's Campaign, which was planned to be yet another march on Washington, but this time in 1968, he said he wanted to create, quote, "a multiracial army of the poor." You see, if you move beyond the standard narrative of the civil rights movement, those among you who may not be African American may come to identify with the civil rights movement. For example, the Latin American contribution, and specifically the Mexican American contribution to school desegregation, cannot be overstated. Right here in California, 2 Mexican school segregation cases, one in 1931 known as the Lemon Grove Incident, and another, the Mendez versus Westminster case in 1946, established that racial segregation in California schools was unconstitutional. This is really important because it provided the case law, the legal precedent, if you will, for the Warren Court, the Supreme Court, to decide favorably in Brown versus Board of Education. We might then call this the American Civil Rights Movement. This is why we remember MLK as one of America's best. You see, Black people and supporters of the movement demanded that the United States live up to its highest ideals for everyone. Yet King was not only concerned with the well-being of African Americans, or only Americans for that matter, but was concerned with the well-being of those around the globe in places like Asia, Africa, and in Latin America. He was a critic of a specific type of financial investment in Latin America, which ignored those who were impoverished in those nations. On the matter of Vietnam, he felt that the American press embraced his position of nonviolence when it came to domestic issues, but ridiculed the same position when it had to do with, quote, his little brown Vietnamese children. But I said we wouldn't go to class today, right? You see, as an academic, I know education is a great equalizer. I'm a kid from the projects, from a family who survived and experienced multi-generational poverty. I know my education provided me significant choices. Reverend Dr. King, Jr., as a Morehouse man, obviously advanced the cause of education. And I am thrilled that college readiness workshops will take place here today. But in the meantime, or for those among you who, for some reason, cannot at this time pursue degrees, I share with you some of Dr. King's thoughts on the matter. He explained, quote, "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree in a sentence to serve. You only need a heart of grace." As our MC Joe Brown mentioned, you see, according to King, life's most persistent and urgent question was, what are you doing for others? When King gave his last sermon, some remember it as the drum major sermon, at Ebenezer Baptist Church, he in a sense outlined his own eulogy. He imagined what one might say at his own funeral, and he was adamant that no one remark on his degrees or his many awards. But rather he said, quote, "I'd like somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King tried to love somebody. I want somebody to say that day that I tried to be right on the war question. I want somebody to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry, that I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want somebody to say on that day that I did try to visit those in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. So as we turn our attention to our contemporary struggles, I ask you, who among us tries to love and serve humanity? Who teaches or cares for children at home or at work? Stand up and give yourself a hand. Or infirm or disabled, stand up. Who is disabled and nevertheless continues to be of service, stand up. Go ahead and stand up for yourselves. Who volunteers at his or her church, synagogue, mosque, or temple, stand up. Who belongs to civic organizations like the NAACP, the Onyx Club, Metcha, LULAC, Jackal, the Delphins, CORE, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, the Knights of Labor. Stand up. Who is a member of the political process or keeps track of their political process by being active with their political party? Stand up. Who here stays active by voting in off years? Stand up. Who here writes letters to their representatives? Stand up. Who here continues to help others even though they can't find a job? Stand up. Who here continues to go to work for a job that they cannot stand, but they do so because they know their kids are watching them? Stand up. Who has opened a business because they want to forge a way for themselves and their families and their communities? Stand up. Who here has returned to school even though they were afraid? Stand up. Who here writes letters of expungement to expunge criminal records? Stand up. Who here writes letters to prisoners or sends care package to those who are incarcerated? Stand up. Who here tutors someone to read? Who here gives advice at the barber or the beauty shop? Stand up. Who here translates for non-English speakers? Stand up. Who here refrains from judging our brothers and sisters who suffer from diseases of drug and alcoholism, but instead tries to help them? Stand up. Who here helps returning veterans just back to life? Or who helps active duty members by sending them a letter just to cheer them up? Stand up. Who here donates food or clothing to the homeless? Who here offers a helping hand to the undocumented? Stand up.